back to Katrina's Creations Knitting Podcast. This is episode 30, and I have had a lot of new viewers in the past 2 weeks. I think I had 30 new subscribers, so welcome to the channel, and I hope you enjoy it. And for all of my returning viewers that have stuck with me through this whole thing, I really appreciate it. And yeah, I just really enjoy the knitting community, and I feel like we're like one big giant knitting group together. I've met a lot of new friends, even though we've never met, so I'm really enjoying it. And so I thought, because I have so many new viewers, even though it's in my intro in the beginning, I thought I'd explain a little bit more about where you can find me. I do not do Instagram. I tried it. I have a track phone that's masquerading as a smartphone. It just does. I don't have the text. I can text, but I don't have the data function on it in order to. I can take pictures, but I can't transfer them to my computer or do things on the internet. It's a track phone masquerading as a smartphone, but it's really not all that smart. It's very basic because that's about all I can handle. So anyway, I am not on Instagram. I am on Pinterest and on Facebook as Katrina Knits. There's not much on my Facebook page right now. It's mostly just the videos. But if you go to my Pinterest site, you'll see, I think I've got 20-some boards right now of not only knitting things, but favorite things, favorite food, some crazy knitting like comic things. I've got stuff on bookmobiles because I'm on a bookmobile. That's what I do for a living. And there's also my ideal house with all the different ideal rooms that I want in my ideal house. We can all dream. So anyway, I also have a Ravelry page and a Ravelry group, and I will put the links to my Ravelry group, my pattern, and my Etsy shop in the description box below. But if you want to go on Etsy or Ravelry, it's Katrina's Creations, all one word, no apostrophe, just all one word. And the Etsy shop does have a sale running in it right now, so everything's been marked down that's in the shop. So, yeah, so check it out if you'd like. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Click the little red box below. If you've enjoyed this video at the end, give me a thumbs up. We'll just get started. Finished objects. You saw last week that I had 2 dishcloths, and I talked about how to measure and weigh yarn so that you knew if you had enough to have a third one. Ta-da! There it is. I had enough to make a third a dishcloth. I haven't woven the ends in because I just finished it. And I have this much left. So I actually could have made this a little bit bigger, but I really didn't want to play yarn chicken. So this is not enough to make another dishcloth, but I could make a coaster or something with it, or I might just hang on to it for scrap. So that's what I have for the finished object this week. Now my works in progress, I have, of course, my fade. I have worked almost exclusively on this fade this week. I've gotten a long ways. I am in the 5th color, and I am in the lace section of the 5th color. So you can see the progress keeper here, which is where I was last week. And I'm starting to actually love my fade again. There for a while I was having a falling out with my fade because I was just really sick of it. But when I see these 2 colors together, I am absolutely loving it. I really like the way these, actually it's 3 colors. It's this turquoise, and then it fades into this kind of a turquoise and a deep blue, and then it's into the light blue, and I'm into the 2nd row here of the lace. So here's the whole thing. I really think I'm going to finish it for next week. That is the goal. I think right now I'm at probably about 6 feet. I'm thinking it's about 6 feet long. I haven't laid down next to it like some people have. Only because I probably wouldn't get back up off the floor after I did that. But anyway, yeah, it's got to be around 6 feet at this point. And I don't have much more to go. And the blue that I am using, the blue section is the largest of all of the sections because you were at the widest points. I think it's 230 some stitches at that point all the way across. So I have this much left. I do have another skein of this because I am going to need it, because this will go from here to one more color, which is like a minty, turquoisey, seafoamy green type of color. So that will be the final color. So all in all, this is all kind of blues and turquoises. Some of my favorite colors, apparently, lately. So that's how far I have gotten with my fade. And then I have been working on, we have the knit along going on, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I am making a shawl for the knit along, so I'm participating. I'm not winning any of the prizes or anything, but I'm knitting along with everybody just because I want to be part of the group. So the only thing is the pattern, and it is a pattern that I wrote. It was written to be used with a sock or fingering weight or sports weight, you know, a little bit heavier. I'm doing this. This is almost like a micro lace. I mean, it is. I talked about it last week. It is extremely fine. It's, to be honest, I can only do it for about an hour at a time, and then it makes my eyes go buggy. I almost need like a magnifying glass. So the pattern is completely, I'm following the pattern, but I'm not following the stitch count because it's completely thrown off. Here I am so far. And it is different colors of like denim here. And then it goes to the lace section here. And that's in a gray. Then back to the denim, and here is the lace section again that I'm on, so that you can see what it really is going to look like. Like I said, I'm basing it more on, I'm looking at the pattern and holding it up to the pattern and sizing it that way. I'm not so much going by the stitch count in the pattern. This is what it actually looks like, and I've shown this many, many times before, but this is what the shawl that I am making looks like. And it's called Banner Unfurled, and I'll talk more about it when we get to the information about the cowl. But on my lace shawl that I am making, I would be the equivalent of this section right now. So I've been just knitting a bit, and then I hold it up to the pattern to see if I'm like roughly in the right size. Is about the only way I can do this. Like I said, my eyes are going buggy. I think I'm knitting this on size 1. It's really tiny. I know that. I need a magnifying glass to do this. So actually my bifocals haven't even been helping. I've been like doing this to be able to see it. So just a little bit at a time. That's all I'm able to do with it. Maybe I'll go ahead and talk about the knit along since I just showed that and already showed the pattern. The knit along is for my Banner Unfurled pattern. This is my granddaughter in the picture. She's my oldest granddaughter. I have two granddaughters and 9 grandsons. So we have a grand total of 11, and she is the oldest of my grandchildren. So she modeled this for me. And this one's done in red, white, and blue because initially I made this pattern because I didn't have anything to wear for patriotic holidays. I live in the U.S. and rather than just wearing like, you know, blue shirt, white bottoms, and a red pocketbook, I wanted something that looked patriotic. I did wear it for Memorial Day, and so now I can go back to it was on display at our local knit shop, so it can go back there until I borrow it again for July 4th. But anyway, here it is. If you go on Ravelry, and like I said, I will put the link to the pattern below. If you use the coupon code KC20, that would give you 20% off the pattern. The pattern's $4, and the 20% off gives it to you for $3.20. So that's the pattern. You can do it in any 3 colors or 2 colors. I know somebody that's making it in 2 colors. I haven't talked to her to see how it's turning out because I'm not sure how the striping would work with that. But anyway, you can do it in any colors you would like. If you want to try it to lace weight like what I'm doing, you're more than welcome to, but just keep in mind the size because otherwise it's going to be this big. But yeah, you can do it and just be creative. And the only thing you have to do to enter the knit along, it will run until July 30th. The only thing you have to do is enter it, post a picture of it in the Ravelry group and tell me what kind of yarn that you used. The prizes for it, the first person to post, by the way, will get a set of stitch markers. And I have them here in a bag, so I'll show you what you're going to get. So the first person to post their finished pattern gets a set of 6 stitch markers. And here's one of them. See if I can get this so it doesn't glare. No, maybe not so much. Maybe behind my hand. Yeah, there you can see a little bit. It's knitting needles holding a little sweater. It's cute. Then there's one with yarn, the skein of yarn, and I need 2 hands to do this. Here's another one, little skein of yarn with the needle sticking out of it. This one says Knitting Diva. This says I love knitting. And these are also available in my Etsy shop, so if you want them, you're more than welcome to go on there and buy them. I think they're like $2 for the set of 6. But anyway, this one says Knitting Queen. And the reason these are attached like this, there's a small loop here. So if you're using a small needle, or if you're using bigger needles, or if you want to color coordinate anything or whatever, there's a larger ring here. And this larger ring is just a split ring, so you can actually just take it off. It just, unbends like this and you slip it right off if you don't want to use that big of a loop. But that way you can get more sizes out of it, where this is a little smaller loop. So that is the prize for the first person that posts. The winner of the knit along, I will use a random generator, and the winner gets this drawstring project bag and set of stitch markers with lapis lazuli or lazuli and a progress keeper, and they also get a skein of primrose yarn, and this is Blueberry Jazz. So that is the prize, and like I said, it runs until July 30th. Now if you started on June 15th, if you would like to have a chance to win in another cow, there's another knit along of my pattern going on Three Sisters Knit, and they are running the cow from June 15th until August 30th or 31st, something like that. So if you would like to enter in both of ours, you could, but you would have to post your finished project on mine like around June 15th in order to qualify for them as well, because theirs, I think you have to start June 15th. So, and that is Three Sisters Knit, and like I said, they are doing a knit along as well for the same pattern, and they've got prizes as well. So yeah, go check them out. If you haven't looked at their podcast before, do so. It's good. Yeah, so that's what I've got with that. And don't forget, like I said, if you do get one of the patterns, don't forget to use the coupon code of KC, like K as in Katrina, C as in Creations 20 to get a 20% off discount. Now this week I'm going to do something a little different. I've done different history lessons kind of before. This one I've done a history of spinning and weaving, and I've also done a history of the first ladies and knitting in U.S. history. And I will put little cards up in the corner here, the little eyes that'll pop up here, like little letter eyes. If you click on those, it'll take you to the link where I did those podcasts. But this one, I thought I would do the history of knitting needles and where it all comes from and what came first, what kind of knitting needle came first. So be guessing what kind of knitting needle do you think came first, because it totally surprised me when I found out. So with that, I will tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading with this because I typed up 2 pages of notes here, and I will never remember all the details unless it's right in front of me. So the oldest knitting actually wasn't knitting at all. For years, there were some scholars, there are some stockings that are in a museum. I think it's in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And they are ancient Egyptian toed socks. They're red, and for years, people thought they were knitted. They thought they were the oldest knitted articles in existence. But as they started looking at how they were, like, coming apart, because of course, you know, they're so old, they were over 1,000 years old, and they're starting to rot and starting to unravel. And as they started looking at how they were unraveling, they realized that it wasn't knitting. There's actually a craft called howl binding. It's H-A-L-B-I-N-D, howl binding. And it's a process of like intricate knots, but when it's all put together, it looks just like a knitted article. So for years they thought it was, and then they found out it was not knitted at all. There are some Egyptian hieroglyphs showing a man carrying some long sticks over his shoulder, and there's like a knitted garment hanging off of these long sticks, and there's also some balls of yarn stuffed, like pierced onto the sticks. So, but they're kind of long for knitting needles, but they think that that is some kind of a reference to knitting needles, because the original knitting needles were not pointed the way we know them now. The oldest existing knitting that we have around dates between 1000 AD and 1400 AD. And it is some intricate colorwork socks that were produced in Egypt. But as the source that I used and the references I've got, nobody does colorwork as their very first knitting project. The detail that is in these, I mean, it's unbelievable. It almost looks like a Fair Isle stitch. Nobody does that for their first work, so they know that as detailed as it had to be, there had to have been knitting that was even older than that. It just hasn't existed. So the oldest existing knitting that they have that is still like, it's in fragments at this point, but it dates somewhere between 1000 and 1400 AD. And it's really pretty. It's like almost like a Delft blue and a cream color, but yeah, it's not something that a beginning knitter ever would have tackled. So they know that there was definitely knitting going on before the dates of these socks that are in this picture that I checked out. Knitting also originated in the Middle East, and why they believe that is because most English-speaking countries read from left to right. So it only stands to reason that if we invented knitting, we would be knitting left to right. But when you start knitting, you knit right to left, which is how they read in Middle Eastern countries. So they read from the right to the left, so it only would have made sense for them to be knitting from the right to the left. And they do have record of some knitters from the Middle East working for the Catholic Church at one point during the 1400s that were doing some knit work for, I guess, their church or something, but they do have record of some Middle Eastern knitters coming in, and that would have been back in the 1400s. So that's why they think it came from the Middle East. The first knitting actually was not done with knitting needles, as I said, at all. They almost, the pictures I saw, they were almost like long knitting needles with hooks on the end, sort of like Tunisian crochet hooks. And they actually would use those hooks to move the stitches from one side to the other instead of like slipping our stitches how we do now. They would actually grab the stitch and like hook it over, like almost like a combination of crochet and knit, which would be like your Tunisian crochet. The very first knitting needles were DPNs, double pointed knitting needles, and the original knitting was not done flat, which is completely backward from what I would have expected. I would have thought we started with flat knitting and developed into doing circular knitting, but it actually was the other way around. They did not know how to do the purl stitch. Everything was done in a garter stitch or a knit stitch. So when you're doing that on double pointed needles and you're knitting circular, it looks like stockinette. It doesn't look like garter stitch. I'll show you some examples. If you're knitting, just straight knitting all the time, and experienced knitters would know this, but if you're watching and you're a beginner knitter, that's why I'm explaining this one. This is garter stitch. You can see it has a lot of texture to it, a lot of shawls. It's stretchy, and a lot of shawls nowadays are being done in garter stitch. A lot of the ones I've done are garter stitch shawls. But this is what you get when you go knit, when you knit or do garter stitch. Every row is just knitted. When you do a knit row and then a purl row, it ends up smooth like this, like how your socks would feel. They're smooth on them. And that's because one row going across is knit, and when you come back on the wrong side, you purl. Well, when you knit in a circle, you don't have to knit and purl. You do a knit stitch, and it ends up looking like this. So they actually were doing circular knitting using double-pointed needles, and the needles were made out of copper or out of tortoiseshell, ivory, walrus tusk, things like that. The knitting was also originally done, like I said, in the round, and they were only using the knitting stitch. There are actually a series of paintings that were done in the 1400s. They are called the Knitting Madonnas, and they are paintings of Mary and Jesus, and she's knitting, and she's holding several needles, like double-pointed needles in the picture. So, yes, Mary was using DPNs in the picture. So, I had to check that out because I thought that was kind of interesting. So anyway, flat knitting using only two knitting needles was not done until the 1600s. Even though the first mechanical knitting machine was invented in 1589 by an Englishman named William Lee. The straight needles that were used then were also called knitting pins. I mean, today we just call them knitting needles. They were called knitting pins. The purl stitch, which would create in flat wear or in flat work, like I said, to create the smooth stitch, you have to do a purl. So the purl stitch had been used in Egypt for some time, but the Europeans didn't start using the purl stitch in flat knitting until the mid-1500s. So, like I said, in order to do stockinette stitch or smooth stitching, they had to invent the purl stitch or incorporate it in order to make smooth knitting. Yarn overs also were invented right around that same time, so that's when lacy patterns started coming out as people learned to do the yarn overs and double yarn overs and things like that would make your lace and your open work. At about the same time, there were things called needle belts and sheaths that were being used. Now what that is it's a belt that fits around you, and it has almost like a real stiff pincushion. It's about this big, and it has holes in it. The original ones were like bundles of maybe rush or reeds or something. What they would do is they would take large double-pointed needles. Here's your double-pointed needle. Now these are short. The double-pointed needles that they were using are about this long. They're, like your regular long knitting needle. They're about this long. And one point goes into the belt, pierces into that like pin cushion on the belt, so it holds your right needle completely stable. So this hand, therefore, is free to be able to maneuver the tension and guide the stitches. So you're actually knitting with this, with your left side. This needle's being held stable, and it frees you up for an extra hand here. With my luck, I'd trip and pierce myself or something. But to learn more about this, and I thought it was kind of fascinating because this is something that is used to this day in the Shetlands and in Scotland and in northern England. It's called supported needle method, and I got this information from the principlesofknitting.com, and if you go there, you can read a little bit more about the history of knitting. That's where I got a lot of my information from. And if you watch the Fruity Knitting podcast, if you don't, you should. It's really, really interesting. Andrea and her husband, Andrew, both knit. She's like a master knitter, and they go on knitters around the world, and they talk to different designers, and it's a very well-produced podcast. Anyway, Andrea wanted to learn this method with the double-pointed needles and the knitting belt, so her husband actually bought her some. But if you would like to check out and learn a little bit more about this, if you go to the Fruity Knitting Podcast, episode 14, it was done last September, I believe. They interview a woman who does that type of knitting, and they go into a little bit more detail with it than I've got time to do here, because they can show it to you a little bit better. But it was very interesting. So that was a type of knitting that was also done right around the same time period. which would have been like the 1700s. Now, the circular needles were first patented in the U.S. in 1918, although there is some question whether that's really accurate or not. They think maybe it was going on in Europe even before then, but somebody in the U.S. got the patent for it. Cable needles, which you use for doing your cable stitches, which are like the little crisscrosses on your sweaters, those are cables. They require a type of needle to do them. They were used in Scotland in the early 1900s. And Scotland was known for Fair Isle sweaters and Aran sweaters. Now, if you don't know what Fair Isle is, I have a book here. This is an Alice Starmore book of Fair Isle knitting. And this is an old book. I think it's from the 80s. But you can see right here, this is the picture in the front. That is Fair Isle. It's where you're doing more than one color in a strip. You might be doing red, red, white, red, red, white, and then the next row might be another pattern within that same color, and it forms a design. So usually when you do Fair Isle, you have yarn coming in not just on your right needle, but you have it coming in on your left needle as well. So you have a different color of yarn coming in on both sides, and they kind of interlock in the back of your work so that the design shows in the front. But they were known in Scotland, and in the 1920s, the Fair Isle sweater became popular because the Prince of Wales at the time, this is the Prince of Wales that abdicated the throne for Wallis Simpson, he was golfing in the 1920s, and apparently he wore a Fair Isle sweater. So it caught on to popularity at that point, and people wanted to have them after seeing it. Of course, you know, him had to keep up with the prince, so they wanted to have it too. At the same time, synthetic yarns made their appearance. Up until then, it all was natural fibers. But in the 1920s, they were able to produce synthetic yarns. The largest knitting needles ever on record, there's been several, but the latest large needle weighs 25 pounds. I guess that's for the set. They weigh 25 pounds, and they are 13 3/4 feet long. And the lady, her name is Jeanette Huizinga. She used these to knit a 10 stitch by 10 stitch swatch. So it would have been 100 needles. It's 10 stitches across, 10 rows tall. So she made a 10 by 10 swatch using 25-pound needles. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, on to project bags. And this I found really, really fascinating. Right now, those are the big rage. You turn on to all the podcasts and everybody's showing their, you know, who they got their project bag from and all the cute material and all this. You would think this was something new. Come to find out, I thought it was something new. Come to find out, it's not new at all. Women have always been knitting for soldiers when they go off to war. Martha Washington had a knitting circle to knit for the Revolutionary War troops. In the Civil War in the U.S., the Northern and the Southern women both were knitting socks and things like that for the men that were fighting. But it was during World War I, in order to try to boost the morale of the women left at home, they were encouraged to knit their bit. In other words, do their bit for the cause and knit. So these women were knitting sweaters and socks. They did this in World War II as well, but World War I, this one really started. And so they were encouraged to knit their bit for the war effort. So women everywhere were knitting items in olive drab and khaki. It was downright unpatriotic and frivolous if you knitted anything else other than for the troops. You were kind of frowned upon. So women took their knitting everywhere, and they could justify going to the beach or going on vacation as long as they had their knitting along with them. So they could sit on the beach and enjoy themselves, but as long as they were knitting their bit, they were okay. Then they weren't frowned on. And the knitting, knitting all those boring colors was, well, boring. Who wants to knit olive drab and khaki all the time? So in order to make up for this, the women, since they had to carry these bags all the time, decided that they'd make their bags look pretty, that would be acceptable. So they started coming up with all these fancy bags, and clothing designers hopped on the bandwagon, and it all took off. The designers were making bags that matched, your gloves, your hat, your outfit, because these women had their knitting bags with them everywhere. So it was really important that they looked really good. Vogue even got in on it, and they suggested that if you couldn't afford a pretty knitting bag, they didn't call them project bags, they called them knitting bags, that you should cut out a cover of their magazine and paste it on a paper bag to carry your knitting. So to accommodate this, they actually produced 6,000 magazine covers that were patriotic, that people could do this and paste it on a paper bag so that they looked appropriate while they were out knitting in public. So they even came up, and this one I thought was hysterical. If you were going to the beach and you, of course, had to be knitting, they came up with rubberized satin. Can you even imagine? Rubberized. I have no clue what rubberized satin is, but apparently you could buy this, and it was waterproof, so that's why you would take this to the knitting. I don't know if their bathing suits were made out of this rubberized satin. Can't imagine getting it on or off or whatever. I wonder if it like shrunk or if you squeaked when you walked around with rubberized satin on. Oh well, that was probably too much information, but that's okay. Anyway, I will put the links at the end here to let you know where I got all this information from, and that way you can read it for yourself if you want to check out a little bit more about the history of knitting. Now, I like pocketbooks. Talking about project bags. I like pocketbooks, and I like watching, and it sounds crazy, but I like watching people go like, what's in my pocketbook? So I thought I would do my own take on it. And I have what's in my project bag. Yes, this is a little Project Notions bag. Not a project bag, Notions bag. This is my Notions bag. I got this from IKEA, and they don't make it anymore. I don't know why, because this was like $2.99. It's really well made. It's like a canvas, and it's got really good zippers. It's got, you can always tell good zippers if they've got lots of teeth. The more teeth, the better the zipper. These are really nice. They unzip really good. So I thought I would show you what's in my project bag. So in the little bag, or the little pocket out here, I put everything that I use all the time. So I have scissors. I have one crochet hook now. The other one's on the floor that I use for weaving in my ends, and a tape measure that I use for just measuring to see if I've gotten it as long as it's supposed to be. Then in the inside the big pocket, I have, this is Tic Tacs, except I keep my needles in here so they don't puncture anything. So these are my needles for weaving things in. I keep that in there. This is my beading needle, which, by the way, if you make the shawl, you need to put 40 beads on it. This is the needle that I use. I'm holding it upside down. It is a 0.7 millimeter. Tiny, itty bitty little hook, but it actually will fit through the hole on a 6 millimeter bead. And grab the yarn and pull it back through again, which is how I bead. So that's what I carry there. Then I have a stitch holder. Don't use them all that much except for like sweaters and things. And then I have a little ring here with all of my stitch markers on it. It's just one of those little notebook rings that you can pop open. So I have that. And then here I have the weights I showed the one time where I use for weighing down lace to bring the points out when I'm blocking it. It's just fishing weights attached to earring backs, you know, the little hook earrings. So that's what I have there. And then I have this little pouch, which a lady at church made for me. They're easy enough to make. It is a pot holder. Then she took the little snack-sized Ziploc bags, laid some on one side, laid some on the other, and sewed bias tape down the center to hold them in place. And then where the loop is, she put a button. So it's really nice. I actually made a larger version of this, which I've shown before, that I used for my circular needles. So in each of the pouches, I have, well, you can't see it that way. I guess I will have to open them. I have my row counter, just a simple one. I have another one somewhere It probably fell off of a project. They're always falling off of projects and rolling someplace, so it went somewhere. Then I have point protectors for your needles. I never use these things, to be honest. Especially since I don't knit on straight needles very often. Even if I'm doing flat knitting, I tend to use circular needles, so I just pull everything into the middle where the cables are, where the cord is. So that's about all I do. I don't use them very often. Then I have some progress keepers. And this is one that I like nautical things, so got a little anchor. And then these are just two that used to be in my shop. They were leftovers. They're just like the, this one says Knitting Diva. They're just like the stitch markers. They're just leftovers. And I had an odd one. I ordered knitting ones, and this one says crochet. So I didn't want to give that away. I don't even use stitch markers in crochet. So I just kept it for myself for a progress keeper. And then I have really large, really large stitch markers. I've used them a couple times when I've knit things, but I don't tend to knit real bulky things like that. I mean, that's definitely for bulky weight yarns. Then I have these. Yes, these are exactly what they look like. They are little bread ties. Why I have these, I watch a podcast called SSK Yarners. I've talked about them before. And one of the ladies on there, Sherlyn, had mentioned a tip one time about using these type of little bread twisty things for stranded yarn. When you're doing stranded work, you're knitting and you actually incorporate different colors within the knitting. So you've got like almost like a bobbin hanging down that you're knitting into. I don't even know how to describe it that well, but these in place of having to go out and buy expensive bobbins, just to use the bread ties. Or if you've got a real long end that you haven't woven in yet, you can loop it around with this and just get it out of the way so you don't by accident start knitting with the wrong end. So that's what those are for. And then I have different versions of cable hooks. Looks like I'm playing a barrel of monkeys here. They're all stuck together. Yeah, here's another one. It's my little barrel of monkeys. And then I have a small stitch holder. Actually, I used one of these stitch, if you want a cheap shawl pin. I like shawl pins because otherwise they fall off of me all the time. I actually bought a silver stitch marker, or stitch holder. You can get them pretty cheap, like under $1. And then I went to Joann's. You could go to Hobby Lobby, use the 40% off coupon, and buy some of their beads that go on like the solid bracelets. You know, they've got the bigger holes. They kind of look like the Pandora ones, but they're like the cheap version. Take your stitch holder, bend it out, slide the beads on and around to here, and then slide this back down again, and you have an instant shawl pin. If I think about it the next time I do a podcast, I'll show you one. Actually, I'll insert a picture. I'll insert a picture of mine, because mine is silver and black. So I will put a picture of that right here. If you guys have any cheap tips, my husband teases me and says that like clearance sales attract me like a bug to a light. Yeah, I've got cheap printed on my forehead. So if you have any tips, let me know, because I love cheap knitting tips. So acquisitions, we're down to the last on the home stretch here. Acquisitions. I've been busy again this week. One thing I bought some more food coloring. You may say this has absolutely nothing to do with knitting. It actually does. I will put a link, again, one of those little eye things up in the top. I will put a little link to my tutorial on dyeing your own yarn using food coloring. Because dyeing can be expensive. Acid dyes can be very pricey. But food coloring, I got this for $1.29 at a discount place. The food coloring I used for the other dye, stuff that I dyed, was 35 years old. It was antique food dye. It was like from when my husband and I first got married. So, yeah. So I plan on getting some more undyed yarn and dyeing it myself with food coloring. So that was my one acquisition. My other thing, I ordered some yarn and it came in. So I will show you what I'm going to put together. I showed you this yarn a couple weeks ago. This is something I'm making for my mom for Christmas. So Mom, if you're watching, pretend you didn't see that. This is Cascade Alpaca lace paints. it is the same lace weight that I am doing my cowl project with. So yeah, I'm going to be buggy-eyed again on another project because this is the same weight. But I got this, and then I got this brown to go with it, because it does have like a goldeny brown in it. And then I got this red to go with it. So those three together. I haven't figured out what color beads I'm going to put with it yet. I really haven't thought that far ahead, but that's the three colors that are going together. And that will be from my mom for Christmas. And my daughter said she wanted a shawl in pink and gray. So these are the three. And I'm not sure. She's not getting the same pattern, I don't think. Not sure. I was thinking I was going to do Drachenfelds with this again. But again, I ordered lace weight. I don't know what I'm thinking. I shouldn't get lace weight. My eyes can't handle this anymore. I'm getting too old to do lace weight anymore. Used to do it all the time, but it's getting a little harder. But anyway, that is, oh, it's really showing a lot of sheen on this. There we go. These two grays are just slightly different in color. If you hold them next to each other, you can see one's a little bit darker. I'm looking in the monitor to make sure they show up okay. Yeah, one's a little darker than the other one. This pink is a little more bright than, well, I was thinking it was more pastel-y, but I think it'll balance out okay. So those are my acquisitions for this week. And I guess that's about it. So thank you again for tuning in, and hopefully next week I will have my fade finished before I fade away. So yeah, anyway. Thank you so much for coming back this week. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of time. My husband and I were fighting. Our day today has been a little crazy. I'm actually podcasting later than I normally do because we were fighting with an air conditioner, and the air conditioner won. We almost dropped it out the top window of our house. We live in a condo, and it's 2 floors. And most everything's on the first floor, you know, like our master bedroom and everything's on the first floor. But up on the second floor are 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, which is the room I'm filming in, is not the bathroom, but the room I'm filming in right now is the spare bedroom / craft room. The room next door is my husband's study. So we aren't up here all that often, but when company comes to visit, and when our son and his wife and the kids come to visit, they are upstairs here, and it gets hot. I mean, we've got central air conditioning, but for some reason it just does not heat this or cool down this upstairs. I think it's because the 2 bedrooms are kind of almost like up in an attic, sort of like a Cape Cod. They kind of sit like a box inside the attic. So, yeah, sometimes it feels like you're in an oven box inside the attic. It gets warm up here. So we decided that we would get 2 window air conditioners. So, did you hear that, Renee? That's my daughter-in-law. Yeah, when you come in August, it will be a little bit cooler. You will not have to sweat it out up here on the second floor. So, yeah, if we can get the air conditioner in. We got one for each room. And, I don't know, between the 2 of us, we were sitting there juggling that thing and sticking it out the window and and it wouldn't fit. And so now we've gone on Google, and my husband's trying to revamp how he's putting this thing in, because we were like Laurel and Hardy trying to do this, and both of us just kept laughing and thinking if we sneeze or anything or let go, we're going to drop the air conditioner right out of the top window. So yeah, it was not good. We spent something that should have taken a short amount of time, spent like 3 hours this afternoon trying to get this air conditioner, and it's still not put together. So actually my craft room, if you could see it right now, it looks like a tornado went through it because I've got parts of the screen laying all over the place, and yeah. the box. We've got parts all over everything, tools all over the place. Yeah, but at least hopefully when I film the next time I won't be sweating up here because it's even warm today and it's not warm outside. So anyway, sorry about that. I digress. Yeah, but I will check out, see you guys next week. And like I said, hopefully the fade will be done, and talk to you all later. Thanks again for subscribing and for stopping by to visit. Bye.